All right. I
No.
think I think we'll get started. It's 8:05. So
Oh, sorry.
so
Now they're starting. Oh. Okay. Never mind.
welcome to the bat. Our annual storytelling extravaganza on Zoom this year. So I have Jeremy and Carol said briefly that they will tell a story. Would like to tell a story after them, that would be great.
Cool.
If not, it'll be a short night. So there were two other people who said they would tell a story, but they're not here. So what we'll do is we're going to mute everybody, and then did you tell anything else?
No.
Oh, Drew has nothing to say. I can't believe it. Okay. So without further ado, we'll start with Jeremy Schneider. Thank you, Jeremy.
Evening. I know my
I love Jeremy.
my computer says Jody, but my name is Jeremy Schneider. And this has to do with my view of perspective and perception versus reality, and paranoia
Jeremy, I can't
versus actuality. In 1993, there was a bombing of the World Trade Center. That was the first one. And sometime after that, after the four gentlemen were convicted, I was called to represent one of them during the sentencing and during the appeal. And at the time that I was asked to do that, I had to speak to my partners about, whether it made sense, whether I wanted to get involved in representing somebody charged with bombing the World Trade Center and what it meant. And then we were talking about it. And then I was speaking to my partners, and they came and they said, you're going to have to go through an FBI security clearance. And, which meant the FBI agent was going to come and speak to me, interview me, ask me questions about my background. And then as I'm talking to my partners, they said, oh my God, you mean I'm going to have to be interviewed by the FBI? I'm going to have to tell them my entire background. They're going to know everything about me. And given my history and given the family tree that I come from, I'm never going to pass. And if I don't pass, I will not be able to work on this case. And in the last 25 years or so, I've worked on other terrorism cases, but each one you have to get security clearance. So you can see classified documents, you can see highly sensitive documents. So it's a very rigorous process to go through to be interviewed. And I'm sitting there talking to my partners, and I say, there's no way. I will never get, I don't want to say pass, because that's a kind of a weird way. I will never get approved to go see the security clearance because of my family. Now, the reason I had this reaction is because those of you who either do or don't know me, my family has been in Gold's Ridge since 1938. And my grandmother used to, when they came here from Eastern Europe, used to sell the newspaper, The Daily Worker, on the elevated trains in the Bronx to show. But more importantly, she made sure that when she was giving out the newspaper or selling it, she had a cigarette to show that it was important for equal rights. Women should be just as stupid as men to smoke. If men could smoke, women could smoke. So she used to smoke a cigarette as she's selling the Daily Worker. That's my grandmother. My father was blacklisted from his job, both at first initially in the National Labor Relations Board. And then when he was a teacher, he was blacklisted there from New York City, New York State. He had a problem there. My uncle was called before the House Un-American Activities Committee and before the Senate, was held in contempt. There was many, many years of litigation. My sister, who happens to be on the screen now, in 1963, went down to March, Washington. I was, over the years, marching in various, down on Wall Street. I marched here, I marched there, went down to Washington, D.C. I actually handed out the Black Panther newspaper in Long Beach, Long Island. So I thought I have a serious history of anti-government activity. I have a serious progressive history fighting for social justice, racial justice, gender justice, the whole bit over the years, you know, for 60, 70, 80 years, right? And I also knew that for a fact that the FBI was interested in my family, because when I was in college, I actually did a paper on the FBI, and we were able to get an entire FBI file that my mother and father had, you know, years before. And of course, you see how much was redacted. But I see there was a substantial, not just a piece of paper, but a nice size file. So I'm thinking the same way, a few weeks ago when we had one of these Zooms, somebody was talking about, shh, the FBI is listening, right? Shh, the FBI is watching. And Fred, I think, told a story about how the postmaster in Goldens Bridge used to send the return addresses to the FBI. So I was seriously concerned. I mean, I really wanted to represent these people or have the case. And I said, there is no way. And I know that the FBI is going to never approve me. So I have the FBI come to my office. He interviews me. He asks me about every single thing I ever did, whoever I lived with, my friends, my family, told him everything. And I was sweating. I was dripping. You know, I was, you know, talk about a guilty conscience. I knew I was not going to happen. And I told my partners, be prepared for me not to get this case, because I was not going to get approved. I was not, because the FBI was just going to say no. I can't tell you how upset I was when I was approved with no problem at all. Completely, I passed with flying colors. So as paranoid as we think we are, because maybe somebody is watching us, the reality is, yes, they watch us, but I don't really know how much they care about us, or how much we think we matter in the world, as opposed to what they think we matter. So I have to tell you, that was one of the things that I was very interested in doing, in representing terrorists at the time. And I was very interested in getting approved by the FBI. But the fact that they approved me hurt my feelings so. And my grandmother, my mother, my father, my uncle, my sister, everybody in my family thought that we mattered. And I hope to God that we do matter. But I have to tell you, I was very insulted that I passed. That's all I have to say about that. Thank you.
Yay. Well, you matter to us, Jeremy. Thank you. You always tell a great story. I appreciate it. Thank you. All right. And next up we have Carol. And let's see. We unmute Carol. Did you unmute her?
Yeah.
No, she's not.
Oh, she has to unmute herself.
Oh, Carol, can you unmute yourself?
Yeah.
There
Okay.
you
Can you
go.
hear me?
Yep. All right, Carol. Thank you so much for telling a story tonight.
Okay. Well, family has shown up tonight, so. Okay. Poo, 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 my dear Aunt Blanche would often say. At first, somewhat baffled, I came to understand the meaning of this phrase. When speaking of your good fortune, you're attracting the attention of the evil eye that has the power to spoil things for you. The incantation, poo, 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 was a way to deflect and protect from the evil that's there. By saying poo, 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 you are able to ensure some good. So last winter, I was caught. I said to my new neighbor, oh, I have a really strong immune system and I rarely get sick. As soon as I said that, I knew that Aunt Blanche would have chimed in, poo, poo, poo. But she wasn't there to protect me. She had passed away the previous year at the age of 100. Last January, I kept running a fever in the evening. It would be gone the next day, but it left me feeling really tired. And this kept happening several times during that month. I mentioned this to my primary care doctor, who proceeded to order all kinds of tests. The tests revealed that my liver enzymes were high and something didn't look right in an X-ray. She ordered a CAT scan with instructions to not leave the office where the scan was done until she called with further instructions. When she called, she wanted me to go directly to Northern Westchester Hospital. She had ordered a bed for me and was scheduling an endoscopy for the next day. Yikes. I didn't understand what was going on. I was so frightened. I was sure that this was the end. When I came to after having that procedure, the doctor told me I had a precancerous adenoma blocking the bile duct. This news was followed by his saying I was very lucky. Yes, lucky. This didn't sound like a stroke of luck to me. But he then added, if we found this a year from now, it would have been too late. Then he told me that I needed major surgery, Whipple surgery, and he highly recommended a surgeon at Montefiore Hospital, who, as a surgeon, had, quote, the best hands in the county. She was the doctor he would send his own family member to. Now, unfortunately, Montefiore was out of network for us. But fortuitously, while in the waiting room, Russ had chatted with a woman who turned out to be a Medicare insurance agent for multiple states. He dashed back down to the waiting room to find her still there. She said she could get us switched to a different policy starting March 1st. We made an appointment with the recommended surgeon who unexpectedly, and again fortuitously, had an opening because there was a cancellation, and that was for March 5th. We liked her enormously, and our daughter claims that both Russ and I have a crush on her. Well, her French-Canadian accent and the reputation for having the best hands in the county certainly made her crush-worthy. I had the surgery on March 5th, a 7-hour surgery, no less. I came out of it with minimal pain, which I'm told is highly unusual. Again, fortuitously, I was discharged from the hospital 5 days later, just before every hospital in the area, including Montefiore, was overtaken by COVID-19 patients. Fortunately, I have made an amazing recovery. Poo, poo, poo. Follow-up tests show that everything is now normal. I find myself thinking that Aunt Blanche was with me throughout this challenge, saying poo, poo, poo on my behalf. Thank you, my dearest.
Thank you, Carol, so much. Thank you for sharing that. It's an amazing story.
Not bad, you can see.
See?
Oh. We're so glad that it turned out all right.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Who else? Whoever else wants to speak, they have to unmute or wave.
Okay. Is there anyone else who wants to tell a story that wasn't signed up? I'm blaming all this on the COVID.
Martha.
Oh, Martha. Hi, Martha. Hold on. I think you have to unmute yourself, Martha.
Am I unmuted now?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Okay. Something Jeremy mentioned about gender bias or feminism or something related to that made me think about this. I don't know if there's anybody listening who was around here in the 70s, a female it would have to be, but we did in this colony have a women's group to have our consciousness raised. And I was a member, so therefore my conscience was raised. And I considered myself to be a fairly strong feminist woman. So it was in the late 80s that I was kind of surprised that I was terrified at the idea of traveling alone. Something came up where our son Peter was going to school at Antioch in Yellow Springs, and we would call him every Saturday, and his roommate would say, oh, he's not here, he's studying in the library. Well, anybody who knew Peter knew that was not the case. It later turned out he was following the Grateful Dead. And when I got an inkling of this, I knew I had to travel out there and have a word or two with him. George wasn't available. He didn't have vacation at the time. So I would have to make this lengthy trip on my own. That meant being out, staying by myself in a hotel, and so on. Well, we've gotten the vote, the women got the vote, and we have a lot of other options that were not present in the 50s, certainly. But there are these subtleties, like a woman traveling alone is, at least in the 80s, was vulnerable. Back then there were catcalls, if you left yourself open to all kinds of things that could be unpleasant. But nevertheless, this seemed like an urgent thing. So I got in the car and I was traveling on, I guess it was Route 80 heading west. Well, Route 80 is primarily a truck route. So it was me and the truck drivers. And I thought, oh God, I'm in trouble now. Bunch of roughneck truck drivers. Well, I couldn't have been more wrong. They would flash lights so that I could pass, flashlights in the opposite direction if there were police present. At one point, there was absolute pouring rain. I had to pull off under a bridge. A truck pulled up behind me with flashing lights to protect me so nobody would hit me from behind. Couldn't have been better. Things were going swimmingly. And then I had to stop at a hotel for the evening. And I was nervous checking in alone, but the thing that made me most uncomfortable was sitting at a restaurant table by myself. But I was prepared. I came with a book, which is something that people did more often. This is pre-phones. There was no GPS, there was no phone. It was just me and my book. So I went down to dinner and I was feeling very uptight. The feeling was that people would be looking at me and here is this person in early middle age alone. Why is she alone? And anything else you could think of. I was really feeling very uptight. So I read my book and I ordered a glass of wine. And as I had the first few sips of wine, I began to relax a little bit. And I thought, this isn't so bad. Maybe I should just look up and see what's around me. So I put on my best social smile and I took a quick look up and looked down. And I realized that I looked into a very friendly face. So things were not that bad. My shoulders relaxed. I felt like I could do it. I looked up to take a longer look, only to notice that I was looking into a wall of mirrors. And that friendly face I was looking at was my own friendly face. It was the most liberating experience imaginable. After that, being able to laugh at myself, it was really a serious case of what the hell. And from then on, I've really looked forward to actually traveling by myself. I could stop where I want, I could see what I want. It was a turning point in my life.
Thanks, Martha. Thank you so much. That's great.
Lizette, I'll do a story.
Great. Go ahead, Max.
Has to be true, right?
I don't really care.
You don't really care, okay.
What?
Screw
Yes.
it. Oh, no, it's true.
Yeah.
So, our camera needs better resolution, I can tell you that. Okay.
Yeah, for some reason, it looks like you have a beard or something's dirt on your face.
Okay,
That's a
mute
different
yourself, mute.
All right. Oh, good. Drew got muted. Okay. So the last couple bats that I've done, I've inevitably told stories about cars and travel. A couple of years ago, it was about Marty's little green car. Last year, it was about getting my driver's license and the misadventures I had in doing that. So I figured I'd continue the theme and talk a little bit more about a car. Rebecca and I got our first car last year, and our first car ever, and we're very happy about that, to have it. But my first car is the story I wanted to tell you about now. So I got my first car shortly after getting my driver's license. It was a 1986 Chevy Nova. Now, the Chevy Nova may make you think of the muscle cars of yesteryear. That was not what this car was. At some point, the Chevrolet company had decided that the Nova kind of signaled a certain muscularity, and what better thing to do but in the 80s slap it onto a hatchback so light in frame that you could maybe 2, 3 high school students could pick up the back end, turn it sideways in a parking spot so it couldn't move. I know that obviously because it happened to me. So I purchased that car from my best friend, Arlo Jamrog's mother, who was buying her own new car. And I bought it for $1,000. It was $1,000 I had scrimped and saved and had given to me by various relatives over the months. And so I had a car, and it was so wonderful, so liberating to finally, have your own automobile, have your own means of transportation. And so off I went. And I managed to not get into any accidents. I managed to not get any speeding tickets. And what I've been thinking about is something that's happening now, which is college trips. All these 17-year-olds, 18-year-olds who are going off to college or starting to look at colleges. And obviously these days, the way to travel is by car. And not everyone's flying, but people are driving around. So when I was 17, I drove with my father to do our college tour and driving around New England, driving around the mid-Atlantic and visiting one college after another. Now, at this point, I had this car for a little over a year, and the car itself was about 10, 11 years old. And it was, I'm trying to think of the right word, failing. It was failing. It had a variety of problems, and I wanted to tell you about every last one of them. The first problem that the car had was that it didn't have power steering. Now, that's not a problem per se, because that's how the car was sold. It didn't have power steering. But to just amp it up a little bit more, to raise the ante, was also the fact that this car without power steering had ball bearings within the steering wheel column that stuck, that didn't move freely. So it was wonderful because during this college tour, driving down the highway at 70 miles an hour, I'm sorry, 65, I never sped, the car, the steering wheel would suddenly lock up, and you would have to throw your shoulder, throw your weight into it to get it to move. So that was problem number one. Problem number two is that the car had a carburetor engine. It's not fuel injection. And as part of the magic, as I've tried to educate my children on how a car engine works, Daphne knows all about it. The gasoline, the accelerator flap, that when you press the pedal to the metal to allow more gasoline, more fuel to flow in, would stick. And so you would have this terrible sensation where you'd be going up a hill and you would put the pedal all the way to the floor and the car would start accelerating up the hill slowly. It was only a 4-cylinder. And you would get up to the top and you would take your foot off the pedal and the car would keep going. It would act as if you still had the pedal pushed all the way down. And so you might be going 50, the speed limit might be 50, but by the time you've crested the hill and you're on your way down, you might be heading up into 70, 75, and you would have to put the car into neutral, let the tachometer rev line, turn the key off, and coast slowly to a hopeful stop. So that was problem number two. Problem number three, because why not, a third problem, is that as you were driving, this car was a 5-speed. We paid extra for a 5th speed. And that 5th gear had a propensity, as you were driving along, to pop out of place. So what you would have to do as you were driving, being mindful of the fact that the steering wheel may stick, recognizing that if you push the accelerator all the way down, the accelerator flap may stick as well, you would have to take your knee and hold your knee against the shift, the gear shift, to keep it in 5th gear. So just imagine, if you will, my father, and I'll wrap it up, is to say that the car that Rebecca and I have now suffers from none of these problems, and for that I am very thankful.
Thank you. And thank you, Daphne, for supporting him through the story. Would anybody else have a story that they want to tell? I can't see everybody because a lot of people don't have their cameras on. So if you do, you may as well just unmute and start talking.
Can you hear me? Did I unmute myself?
I hear you.
Can I tell another story, or would I be
No.
would I be a figure to tell one?
Of course you may.
All right, all right. So in 1970, after I had finished 1 year of college at City College, it was the Vietnam War was still going on. I decided to take a year off from school. And I decided I had a brand new Volkswagen, which had already crashed up after 3 days, but I got it fixed. And I drove it down to Florida. And I was going to work down in Florida as a lifeguard, swimming instructor, whatever I could get. And I had, I used to be the lifeguard at Camp Kindleman. So I had Elsie Suller, who was the director there, prepare a letter of reference for me. So I drove down to Florida by myself, took me about a day or so. I didn't read any books in any restaurants like Martha did by herself, because I just didn't do that, but she was much smarter than I was. And I drove down, and I get down there, and I finally go, and I'm looking to try to get a job, and I go into the Castaways Motel, which was a giant hotel motel, had 7 pools, and it was on 163rd Street and Collins Avenue in North Miami Beach. And it was really the swinging place to be in 1970. So 2 things happened there. So when I went there, I spoke to the head pool boy, I guess, at the time, and I showed him my letter of reference, and he's looking at it, and he's shaking his head, and he's nodding, and he's making faces as he's reading it. You know, not that long, right? How often can you say he's a good lifeguard, right? So he's reading it, makes a face, and he finally says, okay, you know, you can have the job. I said, that's great. So I become a pool boy, and I give some swimming lessons on the side, whatever. And then sometime later, 2 things happened. One, I came to learn that the person who was the head lifeguard, the pool boy who was the pool director, who was reading my letter of reference, did not know how to read. So when he was looking at my letter, he had no idea what he was reading. He just looked at it for a while and made believe that it was okay, and then gave me the job. But more importantly, as I worked there for a number of months, turns out that there was an inside job. A bunch of televisions had been stolen from the hotel. And they began to question all of the employees, right? And in order to do that investigation, they decided to give all the employees lie detector tests. Now, I'm telling you now, I know even though the statute of limitations has run, I didn't do it, just so you know. So I'm not worried shouldn't worry about that. But I was still nervous. Now, why was I nervous? Because I kind of did lie to them when I got the job, because I was 17 when I drove down. By the time this incident happened, I had just turned 18. But you had to be 21 to have this job. So on the written application, I lied, and I said I was 21. So the investigation comes up to me. It's time to question me about these missing televisions. And you sit there, and a guy who, actually, I think he might have been the same FBI agent who questioned me about my security stuff later on, but either way, he questions me, and he hooks me up, puts my fingers to some electrical stuff, puts a wire around me, and begins to ask me questions. And my name, I got that right away. The second question, now what they do in a lie detector test is they ask you certain questions to get a barometer. So they ask you questions that you know are truthful questions, so they can test to see how you're going to react when you lie, okay? So the easy question is, what's your name, right? That's easy, right? So I got that right. The second question was, how old are you? And I said, 21. Boing, boing. The guy looked at me. He said, it must be a glitch in the machine. And that was all. That's all. That's all I have to say.
That's pretty good. You got a million of them.
That's a rave. That's a rave review from Liz.
Oh gosh, is there anybody else? Otherwise I might have to tell. Oh wait, Meryl, I see a hand up.
Well, hi everyone, this is Meryl. I wasn't going to tell a story, but since you're soliciting stories, I'm not a very good off-the-cuff storyteller. But the reason I want to tell it is because I keep telling this story as my first organizing story, and but I was really pretty little when it happened, and I think I'm probably not remembering it exactly right. And there may be some of you here now who actually remember more of the facts and can correct me. So I'll tell my story, and then you can tell me what I've gotten wrong Pearl or Dottie or Judy or whoever else might remember this, but it's about how we first got kids folk dancing at the barn. And as I remember it, and as the story was told by my family, there used to be folk dancing at the barn, and a lot of us kids would show up, and you know, some of us would like to follow along or try to, but a lot of us just sort of ran around playing with our friends. And some of the adults who were more serious dancers and whose kids were probably older and not the ones running around getting in the way, decided to, I won't name names, but decided to institute a rule that kids under a certain age, it was probably 13 or something, couldn't come to Friday night folk dancing. And I don't know, I think I must have been about 7, 8, something like that. And, you know, it's like, I really don't know what they were thinking, because, you know, we were, you know, colony kids, and we knew how to recognize injustice, and we knew what to do when you saw injustice, which was organize. And so we got all the kids together. We got one of the counselors to let us into the arts and crafts rooms, and arts and crafts room, and we made picket signs. And that Friday night, we picketed the barn. And I do have a memory of sitting on the bench in front of the barn with a picket sign saying "unfair to kids" and chanting, you know, kids are folk dancers too, and we just want to dance, and things like that. And so a few weeks later, Bart and Colette were hired to lead kids folk dancing. So that's the story as I've been telling it, and one of you can tell me if it's all a pack of lies.
Oh,
Anyone have any corrections or amendments to that story?
I don't know. It sounds, I don't know. Nobody else is unmuted. Pearl, did you want to say something? No, she's not. Oh, hold on. Hold on, you're muted.
I have nothing to say except that Meryl told a terrific Golden's Bridge story.
Anybody else?
If you don't have anything, Jeremy has made me think of something that sort of in that vein.
Okay, thank you, sir. Go ahead.
Okay.
Fred.
So this is the story of how I became a teacher.
A lot of people didn't know you were a teacher.
Netta says a lot of people don't know I was a teacher. I did my Vietnam duty as a teacher in the South Bronx. And in those days, I was of the age, I quit school, I went back to school, and I was going to graduate, and I was going to be drafted right away. And I was not going to Vietnam, so I thought I would become a teacher. In those days, I was a psych major, and a psych major almost made you a social studies teacher. They needed warm bodies. So I think I took one course in education, like the history of education, and I was credentialed to be a teacher. And what I ended up doing was going down to Livingston Street to teach a lesson. And, oh no, before that, excuse me, there was a written test which I had passed. And then the second part after that was I would go to Livingston Street and teach a lesson. So I was in front of a class. There was only one other guy in the classroom who was the testing person. And they gave me some historical question that I don't remember what it is, but I did not know what they were talking about. So you repeat the question back and forth, you bullshit as much as you can, but it was obvious that I did not know this historical fact. When I was finished, I walked out of the room and walked down the hall with this guy, and I put my hand on his shoulder and I said, if you fail me, you're sending me to Vietnam. I became a teacher.
Yay. Thank you.
Daphne, if it's approved, it would be like to tell a story.
We would love Daphne to tell a story. Thank you, Fred.
So I'm gonna just do the lead in and as needed, hopefully not at all, give some details. But Daphne is going to tell everyone the story of when she got her ears pierced.
Okay, so I got my ears pierced recently, actually, like around last year in September. And I was feeling very nervous during the whole car ride. When we got there, I looked at the sign at the building, and it said the name of the store was called Hope is... Oh,
The end
is near.
So the store where we went, so we decided rather than do what I understand to be the traditional method of piercing ears, which involves some sort of gun and punch and I don't
At a mall.
At a mall, right? Daphne went to a piercing studio and tattoo parlor that was in Park Slope, Brooklyn, because that's apparently what you do. And so when we went to it, the name of it was The End is Near. And you want to talk a little bit about what the experience was like?
So we went in, I picked out my earrings, and we just sat down and waited. We looked, and there was a sign hanging on the wall. And my mom said, oh, look, the sign says, Hope is ahead. But
on closer inspection, it said,
Hope is dead.
Also, I think there was a child ahead of you, right?
Yeah, it was a girl. She was younger than me, probably around like 5 years old.
Right.
Her turn was ahead of me. She had her turn, and during the whole time I was waiting, I just heard her screaming and crying and shouting.
And her parents, Daphne's parents, were saying to Daphne, it's gonna be fine.
They did not have to get their ears pierced.
That's why we said it's gonna be fine. We were operating solely out of self-interest.
We walked in, and the guy who
Right.
was piercing my ears, he had like every single part of him pierced. He had many tattoos. And I was honestly
I think
creeped out.
it was practice, right? He was practicing. Yeah.
I was very creeped out.
Yeah.
He pierced my ears. He turned out to be very nice, and let's just say I'm never going there again. Yay!
So very good.
Yeah. Yay, that was so good. Can you get that in writing that she's never going to go there again?
Yes, it was both an ear piercing establishment as well as a tattoo parlor. So I would be more than happy were that to be the case.
All right. Thank you again, Daphne. That was fun. Is there anybody else in the groupie here? I see any hands up? Pearl, are you rubbing your nose or your hand up? Drew's not letting me tell the story I was going to tell. I know.
And can we have a petition to, change his mind? No?
Lizette, why don't you tell that other story? Not started, but tell that other story.
Why don't you tell the author about women's lib and how they don't have to listen to their husband?
Well, it's about Drew. It's about Drew.
Oh,
yeah, well. In that case, you have to tell it.
On that one.
Change his name.
That was a fatal fact. Drew gets the right of first refusal.
Yeah.
Nah.
I'm actually, well, never mind. Okay, is there anybody? Oh, Hanetta. Anetta?
Unmute yourself.
Unmute yourself. Okay.
Hi.
Hi,
So,
Nancy.
I've been threatening to tell this story for many years, and I always chicken out. So, now that I'm relaxed in the islands here, I'll tell it. So, I used to be an attorney. A lot of you know that, and I didn't last very long as an attorney. I didn't like it, but I became a teacher, and I was a teacher for a very, very long time. And I taught law, and I taught American history. And I always tried to sort of tell anecdotal stories to keep the kids awake, and US history can be pretty dry. So for the non-attorneys in the room, when I got to a very important legal case, which defined racial laws, racial codes for the next 58 years, I would teach my students about Plessy versus Ferguson. And for those of you who don't remember Plessy versus Ferguson from your high school, Plessy was a man who rode on, he was a black man who rode on a train from one part of Louisiana to Covington, I think it was New Orleans to Covington, Louisiana. And he was on the white car, he got kicked off the car, he got kicked off the train, and then it went all the way up to the Supreme Court, and that's where that fatal, horrible case was decided that that separate but equal was fine. And that lasted. Separate but equal was the law of the land until Brown versus Board of Education. So in telling this story to my students, I would tell them certain facts about it that were perhaps more interesting and weren't in the textbook. Like the fact that Plessy was an octoroon, which meant that he was 7/8 white. And he looked white. And it was a test case, pre-Rosa Parks. He wanted to be on the white car just to test the law, but not because he thought that racial segregation was wrong, but because he thought he was white enough to sit in the white car. So when Fred and I went down to New Orleans, I was very, very excited to go to the first cemetery in New Orleans because Plessy is buried there. And the story of Plessy versus Ferguson is emblazoned on his headstone. So we get down to New Orleans and we notice that there's a tour given by park rangers of this first cemetery. And what's interesting about it is, for those of you who have been to New Orleans, you know that the water table there is very, very high. And so they don't bury their people underground because they end up floating in Lake Pontchartrain. So they build vaults to put dead people in, and they have many shelves, and they're pretty high, some of the vaults. And we said we really wanted to go see the cemetery, and it was, they said, oh no, we no longer do that tour because it's too dangerous. It's in a really bad part of town. It's surrounded by public housing, and we don't do the tour anymore. People were getting mugged in the cemetery. So Fred and I said, oh please, we come from New York. We can do this, we can go there. It's not dangerous for us. So we went. And it was actually a fascinating cemetery. There were voodoo queens and whatever, and we're walking through the cemetery, and it's very hard to see more than 10 feet in front of you because the vaults are put in very, very haphazardly. You can only see a few feet. Fred's in front of me, and we're having a wonderful time. We're looking at these really cool gravestones, and we found Plessy, and we found lots of other people. And then it was time to go, and Fred was ahead of me. I couldn't see him because of all these high vaults. And we get to, well, Fred gets to the gate, and he calls back to me, we're locked in. And I'm like, no, that's ridiculous. We're not locked in. It's not dark. It's not even 5 o'clock yet. We're not locked in. So I finally make my way up to Fred. Oh, the part I didn't tell you is that this cemetery has a 10-foot wall around it. Sorry, that's kind of important. A 10-foot stone wall. And so we're locked in, and how do you get out? So we finally ended up finding a low enough vault or a foothold, climbed up on one after another of these vaults, made our way to the gate, and jumped down. And I used to tell my students it's the night that I almost spent with Homer Plessy.
Oh, Amaya. Thank you. That was great. Thanks for sharing it. Sometimes it's a little easier on Zoom, I think, for some people. Is there anybody else that wants to tell a story? Oh, I think that's it. All right. All right, well, let's see. If there's nobody else, I think we'll say goodnight.
Okay.
So
Oh my God. Smile.
Bye, everybody.
Night,
Thank you.
everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Jane and for stories. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. See you next time.
See you next time.
Bye.
Hopefully in the barn.